Stephanie, I want to pick up on something you just said about family planning and reproductive health access being critical to women's sort of economic security and also their well-being. I read many of the briefs for the Supreme Court case, and there were so many women came forward and told stories about how abortion access enabled them to finish school, advance their careers. I'm wondering if you can sort of comment on that and share what you think some of the most influential arguments were that supported your case.
Absolutely. So when a case goes to the Supreme Court, the parties to the litigation have an opportunity to file briefs with the court that set out their legal arguments, but there's also an opportunity for third parties, people who aren't directly involved in the litigation, to file briefs with the court if they feel like they have a stake in the outcome or some important information to share with the justices. And those briefs are called amicus curie briefs, and that Latin phrase means friend of the court. So in this case, there were 42 friend of the court briefs filed on behalf of the plaintiffs who were challenging a restrictive Texas abortion law. And there are a couple of dozen briefs filed on the other side as well. But in terms of the proponents of reproductive rights and justice, our amicus strategy was to encourage as many people and as diverse an array of voices as possible to elevate those voices to the court, to ensure that both the court and the media digesting the briefs really understood the scope of what was at stake in this case. I think some of the most influential briefs came from women who talked about their own personal experience with abortion, and women from all different backgrounds. There was one brief that was just from lawyers who had had abortions, some of whom had argued before the Supreme Court and would be known to the justices. So these are people that, presumably the justices could relate to. And they talked about the importance of being able to make this decision to their subsequent professional opportunities. There were briefs by women from other professions. There was a brief, one of the signers of these briefs was a woman who never worked outside the home, but talked about the importance of having access to safe abortion care to her ability ultimately to form a family and to be a good mother to her children. So I think having that range of stories was really important in helping to set the tone for what was at stake here and to put a human face on it. We also had briefs there were briefs from the medical community talking about the importance of access to safe abortion care from a medical perspective. There were briefs from the business community that talked about how critical it is for businesses to be competitive, for them to be able to recruit and retain talented women, and how much more difficult that is when women don't have the ability to control their reproductive lives. There are also a number of briefs from the faith community that talked about how there are a range of views on abortion among people with different religious traditions, and that these briefs argue that true religious liberty means that everyone should be able to make these kinds of decisions for themselves. There's one brief in particular that I thought was moving. It was a brief from a group of Catholic theologians talking about how even if you start from the premise that abortion is somehow unjust or immoral, you can't cure an injustice through an unjust law. And the brief talked about how the laws at issue in Texas were unjust both because they were deceptive, they were based on the false premise that abortion is dangerous and these laws were needed to make it safer, and of course that the medical community had debunked that. But also these laws were unjust because they targeted poor women, immigrant women, women of color, the women with the least resources to impose on them the largest burdens. And I think that that is a really critical point to think about all of the restrictive laws that we're seeing around the country that target access to birth control or access to abortion. Women who have the resources, women with means, will always find a way around these laws, even if it means going to a different state or to a different country to get the services that they need. But women without the means, those with the fewest resources are going to be the most impacted. And so the Supreme Court, fortunately recognized this and struck down the laws in Texas and have given us a great standard that we can now use to fight restrictive laws in other places.